Hi, TikTok. This is Miss Regine from Soar Educational Services. And today I want to talk about NAFTA and free trade and the impact that it has had. And the reason is because free trade and tariffs has been a hot topic in the media. So I just want to give a little bit of background. So the North American Free Trade Agreement was passed in 1993. It was signed into law by President Clinton, along with the support of the Congress, and even the president before, George Bush Sr., the first. He also began that whole process. So this created a free trade zone between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, and it basically eliminated tariffs on most of the goods that would travel between these three countries. Now, this was something that was gradually phased in, though. So it occurred gradually between 1994 and 2008. Now, even as early as 1992, there were detractors. So Ross Perot, he ran for president against Bill Clinton at that time. He said that, well, jobs are going to fly out overseas. But I think at the time, the mood of the entire world was that, free trade was the way to go. The World Trade Organization was formed in 1994. I believe Asia also created something very similar, like many of the Asian countries created something very similar to NAFTA. So that was just the mood of the world, that free trade, opening up borders was the way to go. But as I said, there were always detractors. So we had Ross Perot, we had others. I remember being in college, and there was the protest, I believe, in 1999 in Seattle against the World Trade Organization. And I remember hearing accusation about globalization. And the concern there was that when you open up free trade, what's going to happen is that corporations in America are going to go overseas, and they're going to pay much less, way below minimum wage. I mean, I want to say almost slave wages, very small wages, and to people of other countries to make these same products, but then still sell them at regular prices here in America. So that was the concern with those who were against globalization. And let's see how it has been. Now, President Trump says that that NAFTA basically eliminated many of the jobs in America. And part of that is true. So there were jobs that were lost due to NAFTA, but the results of NAFTA, the pros and cons, it's a bit muddled. So there were jobs that were lost, but then some studies say that 200,000 export-related jobs were created as a result of NAFTA, and that these jobs have paid more. But there is definitely an area, manufacturing was a big one that lost jobs. A lot of the factory jobs did go overseas. And the problem has been that for those people, there was no re-education or retraining necessarily provided as these jobs were moving overseas. Some of it happened very quickly. So it has been hard for many American workers to grapple and find their footing in this new world. And traditionally, many decades ago, the Democratic Party was seen as a party of the union. But when President Clinton, who was a Democrat who signed NAFTA, many of union members were against this, and they felt that the Democratic Party and NAFTA basically had sold out American workers for a corporation. There is a good argument that the Democrats are corporatists, and that's why many of the union members have backed away from supporting them. So in hindsight, there has been this, but like I said, there have been goods. There have been an increase in wages. So it seems like what it has created is more of a wage gap. So where there are certain industries where wages and income have risen and people are doing much better, there are other areas where people have been left behind and they lost their jobs and there was nothing there to replace what was lost. Now, as far as trade imbalances, I don't see any evidence of trade imbalances. So from looking at the evidence in 2024, 29% of U.S. imports come from Mexico and Canada. but 32% of U.S. export go to Mexico and Canada. So then it seems like we have a net gain there in that area. It might be with other countries, where we have this imbalance, but as far as NAFTA, we have a net gain. Now, President Trump, that was one of his complaints. So when he became president in 2016, he began working with Mexico and Canada to revamp NAFTA. So they created the United States Mexico Canada Agreement. It was signed into agreement and passed by Congress in 2020, and that was still during his term. It is actually very similar to NAFTA. There were some additional concessions, so the Canadian dairy markets had been protected, so America was able to get more of a foothold into that market. And also there were additional requirements to make sure that there were some stronger labor requirements, which, although it was supposed to occur under NAFTA, a lot of it I don't think was being followed through or implemented stringently. So one of the things that he implemented with the United States Mexico Canada agreement is that 40% of a car must be made in a factory where the workers are being paid at least $16. Because, again, some of the con with NAFTA has been that wages did not go up throughout, and it's certainly not in a country like Mexico. So what happened is when the factories went there, they did not give a wage increase, so they just continued following the wages that were being paid there. And sometime when we had products coming from U.S., subsidized farm products coming from the U.S. to Mexico, it actually hurt the Mexican farmers. So some people have arguably, and I can definitely see why they've said that, a lot of the immigration that we have crossing the border has been due to that. So because if the Mexican farmers could not compete with now these cheaper U.S. goods, then they had to find jobs elsewhere. If the jobs that were being provided by the American factories that went to Mexico were not paying a livable wages, they felt like they needed to migrate to America to find wages that were more livable, more sustainable for them. So now recently, although President Trump did sign the United States Mexico-Canada agreement, recently he has been talking about just getting rid of free trade altogether and adding tariffs in many different areas. And while that can be implemented. Now, remember, I did say when I started that NAFTA, with the free trade, was slowly implemented between 1994 and 2008. So if he wanted to do something like that to protect American industries, and also, like I said, the gains of NAFTA have been mixed. So even from a country like Mexico, it has not been just all positive improvement with NAFTA. So there is an argument for having tariffs, but it cannot be a shock to the economic system. So when NAFTA was implemented, they knew that it had to be phased in from 1994 to 2008. The way our economy works, you cannot have a shock and a drastic change. And we saw that with the market. Now, he has since pulled a lot of them back. So it is not that we cannot discuss tariffs versus free trade and the good and the bad of it. A lot of it is how you go about implementing it. It needs to be very methodical and thought through to see who are the stakeholders, who will it benefit, who will it hurt, and not just have blanket tariffs all over, because that is going to affect everyone and just raise prices and cause a shock and drop the market as it has been. So I hope this gave you a good background on NAFTA, the pros and the cons, and free trade versus tariffs. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye.